Welcome back, everybody. So you have now done a bunch of attacks yourself, but we haven't actually talked about like what we mean by something is broken, what is an attack model. So we have different security notions for our crypto systems. We have different attack models. And there's the simplest one where all you're getting is the key. We call this the key-only attack. Then we have the way that you can ask chosen plaintext attacks. So you are allowed to encrypt something, and you can get the decryption of that. So that means the attacker has a freedom to ask for encryption of some messages M, and then he gets C, and he also asked for decryption of the ciphertext. So if he somehow receives a ciphertext, then he can ask for the decryption of it, but that doesn't buy him anything, no, because he needs to have the M before. Let me write down the next one as well, that's the chosen ciphertext attacks, to make clear what the differences are. I should introduce the name, so that's CPA, and this is CCA. And so here the attacker can ask for arbitrary encryptions and decryptions. General messages and decryptions of ciphertexts. And he doesn't need to know that C came out of the encryption. So no need. To know you don't need to know the message M such that C is the encryption of M. So these attack models we have for public key and symmetric key. Now if you look at public key, then there's really no reason to stick with the first one. With public key, you can make yourself encryption of arbitrary ciphertexts. So you always have the possibility to generate encryptions. If you think you learn anything from those, well, by all means take it. For symmetric cryptography, there is a distinction between the key-only attacks and the chosen plaintext attacks. In the symmetric setting, well, you're getting some information. Here's a box that does something, but well, you really need to have the help of the device to well, key-only attack or system-only attack would be the normal thing for symmetric crypto. You don't get to see the public key, there is no public key. So you would get to see, hey, this is guess, and you don't know anything. The next level, the shows in plaintext attacks, means you can ask for the encryptions of whatever you want, but you first have to know that this is an encryption of 25 before you can ask for the decryption of 25. You can't just pick any string and say, hey, decrypt this for me. So CPA does restrict you in what you're allowed to ask the oracles. You can basically think in CPA you're only allowed to ask the forward direction. Now with public key crypto, the forward direction is something you can do by yourself. You don't need any oracles for that. You just have the public key, you pick a message, you encrypt it, you're done. The CCA one is the real target if you're doing public key crypto. Somebody over there has a secret RSA key. You can interact with that box, and the box will decrypt everything for you. Nice. Now, how can there be still a question of, well, what is secure, what is not secure? So the typical thing is, in CCA, you have an attack game. So the challenger picks his secret key, public key, and publishes the public key. And then the attacker does as many encryptions to the public key as he wants. And the attacker can also ask the oracle, the challenger, to decrypt things. So we call these decryption queries. And then the challenger gives to the attacker a ciphertext where, well, the attacker hasn't asked that encryption yet. Now, if the attacker hasn't asked the decryption yet, maybe the attacker got lucky that he had just encrypted this one by himself. But we assume that there are like very, very many messages, so the chance is basically 0. So after this phase, the challenger gives C, which is the encryption, and now it's under the public key of the message to the attacker. And then the CCA game splits into 2 versions. So CCA-I means the attacker now does some computation. And then outputs his guess for M. And the CCA-II game goes back to this phase where the attacker can do more questions, more oracle queries, for anything but the C. I mean, that would be kind of cheating, right? I mean, you give me a challenge ciphertext and you just say, hey, give me the plain text. Then anybody would win. We actually want to get some idea about the security of the system, so we allow the attacker to get any decryption except for this one ciphertext. So attacker does more decryption queries. prime, which is not the same, n does some computation, and then outputs a guess. So the system which resists a CCA-II attack is of course more powerful than one which only resists the CCA-I attack. Now, what we've seen in the lecture at the end of Monday was for RSA, if we're allowed to query something, we have a challenge ciphertext, and we want to query something which is other than this challenge ciphertext, we just compute 2 to the e times this challenge ciphertext, and we get 2 times the plain text. So for RSA, let me note this now. For RSA, the homomorphic property means that we can't get CCA security. Definitely no CCA-II security. Because we can just ask the ciphertext times 2 times, well, if you put 2 to the e there, that's the encryption of 2, and we know that the product of 2 ciphertexts is the encryption of the product of 2 plain texts. So this will give us 2 times m. So we asked for this one. That gives us, we get 2m mod n, and so we're getting n. By RSA here, I mean the schoolbook RSA. We can certainly rescue RSA to some extent, but RSA, as we had it on the blackboard so far, does not satisfy the security notion. There are 2 other ways of writing down security notions. So the first one is, so these are attack models, and so the security notions, well, we want that the attacker cannot compute the secret key from the public key. So that's a bit why we could put the key-only attacks there. If you don't see how to use it, but you're only getting the public key, that would be a very, very strong attack. But the other attack that we're doing here is a decryption attack. So he would say that his else is completely broken. Now, it might also be possible that the attacker tries to get decryptions, and we want that the attacker cannot compute M given the public key and the ciphertext. I mean, this is something we want, but it is really hard to test for. So we want to have something which is easy, well, easy. I mean, we would like to have something where we can say, hey, the attacker can't do this unless he can do something which is a little bit more simple to formalize. So the semantic security is even a bit stronger than this one. So we cannot compute M given PK and should not even learn anything, whatever that means, about n. So this thing here is called semantic security. And this was one of our first security notions in crypto. We want that this ciphertext hides the message perfectly. But even with RSA, you're pretty hard-pressed to show anything. Now with RSA, where we just showed if we allow the attacker to do queries to this oracle, we don't get much anyway. But for some padding, which we're going to see in a moment, proving semantic security is very complicated. There's an easier one, which is called Ciphertext Indistinguishability. And this is actually equivalent to this semantic security. But it's easy to show. That's the ciphertext indistinguishability. Meaning the attacker can choose two messages, whatever two messages he wants. Wow. Could be as easy as 0 and 1, could be 0 and a lot of ones. Like, okay, it has to be smaller than n for our RSA example, because that's the only messages you can choose. But other than that, there is no restriction. So the attacker chooses two messages, gives both of them to the person who is the challenger. Now the challenger decides which one to take, encrypts that one, and sends it back. And then the attacker should not be able to know which one it was. Now that's something that totally doesn't work with RSA. RSA is deterministic. If you send 0, you know that the encryption of 0 is going to be 0. If you're sending 1 or 20, you know what the encryption of 20 is going to be. As long as you have a deterministic system, this doesn't work at all. So we need to randomize it somehow. So let's first write down what we want to achieve, and then let's see how we can do it. So attacker picks two messages, M0 and M1. Then the challenger picks randomly, so he flips a bit. And then that is either going to be 0 or 1, and he picks the encryption of M sub B. So he computes C, which is the encryption under the public key of MB, where B is, well, whatever came out of his bit flow. And then he sends a C to the attacker. So the attacker computes a guess for me. Now in the first attack models, where we're asking for, well, can the attacker get the secret key, or can the attacker decrypt an arbitrary text, there the probability should be something like 2 to the minus 128, or even less. Here, well, there are two possibilities. Somebody who doesn't do any work will get a 50% chance of being right. So we define the attack advantages as the extra that the attacker gets over the 50%. So So that's the probability of, let's give a name to the guess, let's call this thing G. So the probability that G is equal to B minus 1/2. The 1/2 is there because I have a 1/2 chance anyway. We will be always wanted that the advantage is positive, so if you have any device which is always wrong, of course you can also use the attack that is always wrong to get the other one by just negating that. So if you have something which is, well, if the device says 0, you definitely should say 1. Then even though it has a minus 20% chance, you would get a plus 20% chance. So you're taking absolute value there. So this cannot work. Oh yeah, and all of these, the computes, so on, that is then combined with either CPA or CCA in one of those flavors. So also in this model, where you're getting this challenge ciphertext, it is much easier because you know it's either that one or that one. And you can do all kinds of queries. You can do encryption of M0 and M1 yourself, but you should still not be able to figure out anything about which one it was with better chance than guessing. So this can't work for something deterministic like RSA. And I should be clear here, when I say RSA, I mean schoolbook RSA. That is not the RSA that your computer is doing when you connect to the internet. So the attacker could just compute the message, say M0, M0 to the E, mod N, and compare this with the challenge ciphertext. Do the same for 1, and it will be matching on 1. So you would get a 100% chance of winning this indistinguishability game. So that can't be how we're doing RSA these days. Now, if you got to the end of the exercises, you actually saw how we unfortunately still do RSA these days. Who saw the robot attack? Either now or by following the news. 2.5 people? Okay. 1 person for sure, 2 people for sure, and then some who had seen a bit. Robot attack is a fun attack, and you should look at it. They even have a logo, so it must be a good attack. It's a named attack and has a logo. And that's an attack on a way that people try to avoid these attacks we just talked about. So if you want to achieve something that RSA does no longer encrypt deterministically, you have to put some randomness in there. So this one finishes, can compute this one, compare to see, and you get 100% chance. So the solution then is to add some randomized padding. Now, let me show you the easiest version, and that's the version which unfortunately is still being used. It's not a good version, but it's a version which is being attacked in the robot attack, so I'm just trying to convince you that you really, really want to go out of this class and read the robot attack, all the different pieces. That's version 1.5. So that's a standard about public key encryption. And it says how you should do RSA so that you don't have any of these problems. So PKCS version 1.5. Formats or let me say encodes a message like what you really want to send. Let's call this capital M into an RSA message. That's an or lowercase m. And then you compute the ciphertext as we always do. So then computes C, which is congruent to m to the e, mod n. And now the other side knows this encoding, so can do the decoding. And we'll look in a moment, it's a very easy decoding. You can just grab a piece. Now, it will not be enough to say, yes, we found the piece. You also need to do some checking. So the decryption first does the normal RSA decryption and then verifies that this is properly formatted. So the encoding does the following. It puts 0, 0. So these are, this is a representation in hexadecimal. So we're taking the numbers up to 16. So you got 0 till 9, and then you get to 10. That's A, B, C, D, well, till you get to 15. So this 0 actually means 4 zeros. So there's 2 hexadecimal zeros, there is one other 0, and then there's a 2. So if you write this in binary, you're starting with 4 zeros, another 4 zeros, another 4 zeros. Now you understand why they want to write this in hexadecimal, because it's getting kind of long. And then I should do the 2, so that is 2 in binary is 1 times 2 and everything else times 0, so we have 0, 0, 1, 0. So that's the 2, that's the zeros, and so on. Then comes some random padding. And we'll call this thing R, and I'll write some definitions or some requirements on the R next. Then we want 2 more zeros, again hexadecimal zeros, and then comes the original message M. So M in hex. Now we want to have this so long that we're filling up all the bits till N. This is as long as n. And since we're starting with 0 here, so if n has 200 bits, then we have 200 divided by 4, so we have 50 positions here, and we don't need to worry about is this slightly larger than n or slightly less than n, because the first one is 0. And let me do a larger example. If n, well, if the log 2 base n is 248, then we have exactly that divided by 4 that hexadecimal positions. Okay, so then we know how long the message is, so the rest fits in the padding. So R is picked randomly of the right length with exactly that many positions. basically insists that there are no double zeros in it. So if you're doing this in binary, you don't have a sequence of 16 zeros. No 00 substring. So then when you encrypt this, you're getting some ciphertext, then the other side decrypts it, gets some message. The first thing that you should do is look, is this valid? I mean, finding the message is easy, it's just here. But before you say, yep, I got it, you have to look whether this is actually valid. Yes?
200 is 8 zeros, right?
8 zeros. Sorry, I said 16, right?
Yeah.
It's just 8. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's something you have to watch out for. It could happen accidentally. But, okay, well, you pick your own thing, you look at it, you cross out whatever, and that's just an algorithm. So the decryption must check for 0002 as a starting string. And I'll confuse myself. It's 20, not 02, right? You people who just read the attack. No? No, it might be. No, it's okay. It's 02, yes. No, it's fine. Good. So the first thing is you check for the starting string. And if it's not there, you say, failure. This was not a good message. Saying decryption failure. If this is wrong, you have to throw an exception. You have to say something went wrong with this whole thing. Now let's look what this does to our stupid, where is it? Up there, the homomorphic property. If we are thinking, hey, we're smart people, we just multiply by 2. So if you multiply by 2, and there's actually still some space on the top of m, then the multiplication of 2 mod n just shifts everything by 1 bit. So then we still have the 0, 0, 0, but then this 2 turns into a 4, plus whatever is the first bit of the random string here. So this could be a 4 or 5 as the leading part. And that's very much not what the system wants to see. So at that point, the system would go to see, well, we have no idea where you got this crap from, but it's not a valid ciphertext. So that's how all of these encryption padding systems deal with getting the flexibility of the attacker down. Not every message will be valid. Also, if you're playing this game with the indistinguishability, since you don't know what the random padding is, and there are some requirements which I'm skipping, that the random padding has a minimum length. So no, we're no longer allowing you to do 2048 bits in your message. We're not even allowing you 248 minus those 16 positions. Now it is 16, because, well, I'm forcing these two. And I could say, oh, well, everything else is the message. There are some minimum length of how long the padding has to be, some few hundred bits. We have 2000 bits, we have space. Our messages normally are 128 or 256 bits. So there is no problem, we have lots of space for padding. But then if you're trying to figure out which of the two messages, M0 or M1, was encrypted to you in this indistinguishability game, you can't just trial encrypt, because the next time the random padding will look different. So even though you know the two messages, they turn into a ciphertext that you can't control. So that's why in this game here, it's important that the challenger does the encryption. So the challenger knows what padding he put in there. The attacker doesn't know what the padding is. He knows what the two possible messages are. But if everything goes well, he doesn't get any chance of guessing more than 50%. Now, next thing to check for, then he finds the 00, and everything on the right of this 00 is the message. So we output part towards the right, of the 00 as the real message. So we're starting from the left. We know that the random padding doesn't have any double zeros. Then we hit the first 00, and everything afterwards is the message. So if everything went well, this will give you the message back. So the decoding is just there to avoid attacks. There's nothing fancy happening. We totally see our message. Again, if there is no such 00, then you have to output failure. If no 00 is found, now one problem with this is that there's still a lot of math which goes through this. This whole padding is something which, okay, as a mathematician, you go like, yep, I understand those parts, yeah, I need to put in some randomness, else the security notions will bite me. But it's still very structured. Now, what the attack in this robot paper is doing is going back to 1998, a paper by Bleichenbacher, and what Bleichenbacher noticed is if you have such an implementation, it will tell you whether it's valid or not. So we don't have, like in these fancy things where we have an oracle which will decrypt for us. Those things you rarely find on the internet. But if something on the internet is doing a verification of ciphertext, you talk to your bank and the bank will throw out saying, sorry, this was not a valid encryption, connection breaks. Now, what these attacks are doing is they take some message they want to decrypt, so they see some ciphertext coming by and then want to learn something about the ciphertext. Now, if you learn a lot about the ciphertext, like about this M, like M times 15 starts with 0002. Guess what? Also M times 1027 starts with 0002. These are the times that the other side says, oh yeah, you have a valid message. Afterwards it will still break down because whatever you do with it is total garbage. But you will get an information whether it was matching the pattern or not. So this goes back to Bleichenbacher. He noticed that if something tests for you whether it's correctly formatted or not, you get a lot of information about the message. So Bleichenbacher noticed that learning whether some ciphertext gives a decryption starting with 0002 allows to compute M. And if you have M, you also get the capital M. I'm not going to go through all the details, but when you have such a thing which tells you, hey, does it start with 000 something, then you know that, yeah?
I'm still having a question about the random padding. How do you decrypt if you have random padding?
You don't care about the random padding.
But
Your decryption gives you this string. That's m, little m, lowercase m.
But shouldn't you should know the padding?
No, you don't know the padding. The only thing you know about the padding is does it contain any double zeros.
Okay.
So you start scanning on the left. You see it's valid. We have this 3 zeros too. Then we have padding, which doesn't contain any double zeros. That's the only thing we know about this. Then we hit the first double zero, and we know that everything afterwards is our message. If you didn't want to send that message, you shouldn't have put it there.
Okay.
So in Bleichmacher's attack, you don't get to see this information. If you're attacking Alice, Alice will decrypt, and then Alice goes like, this is not formatted correctly, I complain, or I go a step further, and then I answer to you, but, well, if you're talking to your bank with some ciphertext that you don't know the plaintext to, the connection will drop in the next part anyway. But you can see a difference between when it drops between a failed padding and the rest of the connection resets. Yes?
What happens if the last hexadecimal bit is a 0 in the padding? Because then the 00 will shift one bit and the last 0 will be part of the message then, won't it?
Yeah, that's a problem. So I said I'm skipping all the details of how the message is computed. It is computed in a way that it doesn't happen.
Okay. Yeah.
So I should say no 00 as substring ends with 1. Ends in bit 1. So this is not the way you should ever use for encryption, so don't learn it too well. This is something you should recognize if you see it somewhere that, hey, there's enough structure that you can attack it. So let's assume that functionally it works, and that all we know is, does our ciphertext start with this? We're going to do basically the same thing as I said up there with the homomorphic property, namely, we're going to use this homomorphic property and send some s to the e times the challenge ciphertext. Some s. And Bleichmacher goes through quite some details of how you choose the s. You start with a small s and you slowly increment. And at some point, you get, well, most of the time you get a failure. Most of the time, say, I just explained to you, if you take 2 times the message, it would shift by 1 bit, and so it would definitely destroy the pattern. If you shift by, well, 16 bits, then the 2 falls off, and you get a reduction mod n. And then something happens. I mean, computing mod n affects all the bits. So you don't want to go tracing through the bits of this one, but if this one happens to be valid, if the padding is valid, we know that if you take s times m, so that's the m with all the padding inside, starts with exactly the right padding. So it starts with 0002. And so it tells you something about where in this interval it lies. Oh, sorry. Important part here, mod n. that means if you're taking Sm minus R times N, R is used, K isn't used? K isn't used. If you take this number, then this is somewhere in, I do need the length. It's an interval which is starting at 2 times 2 to the large number and goes up till 3 times 2 to the same large number. And yeah, do it here. So I'll fill in something here in a moment where L is the log of n base 2. And then we have, well, 16 positions less, so it's L minus 16. And then we know it's exactly 2 times that and less than 3 times that, because the last part there is in binary 1, 0. If it was 1, 1, then we would reach the 3 times something. All right, so we throw some numbers S at the oracle. It will tell us valid or not valid. And then one smart thing that Bleichmelter does is it increases the S slowly. So you actually have an idea how many times you have reduced. So we know something about K, we know S, and so know, well, approximately, at least we know K. So if you have times 2, you know that there was no reduction until 2 times 16, that's the first time you have reduction mod n. So then you're having 1 times n. If you're taking times 17, it's still 1 times n that you're reducing this. 18, it's still 1 times n. And at some point you overflow with the next power of 2, and then you know it's multiple times n. So this way you know what the k is, or, well, you might be off by 1, so you can try both of them. And this way you build up a lot of relations about your message, and you can get the message. So build up relations. Get n. Now this is an attack which is 19 years old. This attack can go to vote. This is something which has been around for a long, long time. In principle, we know how to do better. There's a better version than PKCS version 1, but what was just the news was that this attack still worked, and it worked against some pretty big sites, so Facebook was vulnerable. So if you were interested in somebody's message to Facebook, I don't know, and if you're interested in somebody else's message to Facebook, maybe Twitter would be an interesting target, but Trump tweets everything publicly anyway. But let's assume that I would be posting something in my secret professor's Facebook group about the exam. You're all very curious about what this message was. Then you could, in a few thousand million messages to Facebook, use Facebook as a decryption oracle. Not as powerful as these oracles, but powerful enough that you can see through this padding. And of course, also with this padding, you don't actually win the, as the attacker, you would actually win the indistinguishability game, because you could just send 2 times the encryption. And it would look good. However, it would fail on the validity. So, okay, lessons, this still works, or at least as of October it still works. And hopefully soon I can use past tense. So there's the robot attack. .org or .com? I put it on the exercise sheet. .org, yeah. Now that is the information for the general public. You are not the general public. You're the educated public. You're sitting here in a course, we're learning a lot of crypto. You can actually read the full version, the paper for this. So, there's a paper on the page, on that page. And you can find that for details. So what we're concluding from this is, even though we don't have as powerful as CCA-II attacks or Oracle, it still works. So don't use PKCS version 1. There are better versions. Yes, I know we're over time. We're going to do a 15 minutes break. There are better versions. For instance, there's something called RSA OAEP, optimized asymmetric encryption pattern, and that one is a lot more involved, but also from the text here we see that we need to be more involved. So what OAEP is doing is really taking the randomness and committing to the randomness. So we used in the attack that we can get away with modifying the message because the attacker would, the verification would only test the beginning. You might have noticed that in the attack I was glancing over, does anybody actually check for the second zeros? Because it might happen that there is no substring which is all zeros. Now what they encountered in the attack was that many implementations only check the beginning part, and sometimes you get different error messages depending on whether the beginning part is wrong or the second part is wrong. So you can actually learn a lot about the ciphertext by listening to what the answer is, because, hey, you also learn something if you know that some bits later on are zero. So there are some better things, but because one doesn't know, maybe some providers are lazy, it is pretty amazing to see. So we met Hanno, one of the two authors, of the three authors. We met him in October and he already had the attack on Facebook. So I knew since October that he had a signed version from Facebook, because, well, if you can use it to decrypt, you can also use it to sign something. So he had used Bleichenbacher to get himself a signed version saying, we attacked Facebook, signed by Facebook's public key. And until now, he held back on publishing it because the vendors, all the people who manufacture equipment, having an implementation of RSA PKCS version 1.5, were so slow that they couldn't just fix it. And even now, there's still two companies whose names he's keeping out of the document because they still haven't fixed their implementation. So like 2 months later for something which is known since 19 years. So there are alternatives. What he says is if you have a really old device which doesn't do OAP, then the best thing is to just say, I don't do RSA encryption. So assuming you have something which we'll do next week, then you can switch off RSA, and that's the safe thing to do. He also found that there are some boxes from Cisco, where Cisco told them, yeah, sorry, these boxes are out of support since 2013. We're not going to fix this. And unfortunately, those boxes don't speak anything other than RSA encryption. So people who have such a Cisco box have to buy new hardware or, well, leave the users exposed to attacks. So that's the world of attacking RSA the way that the mathematicians are a little shocked by. Like, we want to have RSA attacked by factorization. And that's what we're going to do in the second half of today. But unfortunately, most of the times RSA doesn't get broken by somebody having a smart factoring algorithm, but by somebody noticing that a padding gives you an order. So we'll start again in 50 minutes, so that's 5 to 5.